EVO.
This series contains adult language and depictions of graphic violence. Listener discretion is advised.
Hey everybody, so today we're going to talk a little bit about executions and things that are used for executions. And when we started doing the research, we both talked a little bit about our feelings about the death penalty, right, Jeff?
Yeah, and I think, we disagree, but not by a whole lot.
No, not that much, yeah.
I think your position is more that there are cases where it's justified, right?
Yeah, I believe that if somebody is fully caught red-handed killing somebody, they should get the fucking death penalty,
Yeah, emotionally I agree. But then I think I can't get past the intentionally killing somebody thing. And I'm not saying that some of those people don't deserve it.
Yeah, we talked about a little bit, is it a deterrent with certain people, but we don't really think that's the truth.
There's been so much study of that, and if anybody knows if there's a consensus, we'd be interested to hear it, but I don't think there is. And I think one of the things that may stop the deterrent factor is that there's been guys for 20, 30 years who've died on death row. In doing this research, I found a guy who'd been there for 50 years.
Yeah.
So,
but then there's the flip coin. Like if you catch a guy murdering and raping your 5-year-old daughter,
well,
that's where it gets confusing or questionable.
I have to admit, if I was in that situation, I wouldn't wait for the courts. I'd just go kill the guy.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it's an interesting philosophical question, but not as interesting as some of the fun shit we found.
Yeah, we found some good stuff. So, yeah, today's going to be about executions. All right, hi, I'm Bruce.
And I'm Jeff. Welcome to Taboo Treasures, a podcast that explores the human obsession with objects of extreme rarity, infamy, and the darker side of history.
Today's episode, Executions, Cruel to Unusual.
Standing! Load! 8! 5!
Early laws on capital punishment varied by colony, but it was used for everything from minor offenses like stealing a horse, counterfeiting, and arson to crimes like murder and treason.
And the first recorded execution in U.S. history took place in 1608 in what was then the British North American colonies. And it was by firing squad when a Captain George Kendall was executed for spying on Spain.
Yeah, and speaking of stealing a horse, in 1623, the second person executed here was Daniel Frank, who was also the first person to get the noose for stealing one. Well, probably more than one horse, but still.
Still, yeah. It took about another 250 years before someone got the brilliant idea to hook someone up to a chair wired with electrodes and cook them with high voltage electricity. I don't know why that makes me laugh. But so why did they do this? Because they thought it was more humane than hanging, said no one who got the electric chair, especially the first guy they used it on, William Kemmler, for hacking off his wife's head with an axe. Why can't I stop laughing?
So it only took 8 minutes of torture that left him a smoldering husk. And the New York Times described it as, quote, a horrible spectacle, far worse than hanging. So the Times was already woke in 1890. The electric chair, which has adorable names like Gruesome Gertie, Old Betsy, or the funniest one is Old Sparky, isn't used much anymore, but it's still a secondary method in Alabama, Arkansas, Florida, Kentucky, Mississippi, red, Oklahoma, red, South Carolina, and Tennessee. Anyone notice a pattern? A color here?
So then we move on to the gas chamber, which was first used on February 8th in 1924 at the Nevada State Prison. a guy named John Gee was the first person to get the chamber, which was a pump that sprayed hydrocyanic acid into the chamber. It didn't go perfectly, if you can imagine that, and Gee suffered for 6 minutes before he died, but compared to the electric chair, it was a picnic.
On December 7th, 1982, which is 4 years before I got married, you may remember as the 41st anniversary of Pearl Harbor, Charles Brooks became the first person executed by lethal injection in the United States. It was carried out in Texas. Texas was the first state to adopt it in 1977, and Oklahoma was the second. Capital punishment peaked in the 1930s before cooling off a little bit in the 50s. Then in 1972, a judge on the Supreme Court apparently read the Constitution, or at least the Eighth Amendment, and he figured out that the government frying, shooting, hanging, and otherwise unaliving Americans on purpose qualified as cruel and unusual punishment, and banned it altogether.
So, of course, a bunch of states said fuck it and made up their own laws, and the Supreme Court upheld them in 1976, having decided that the death penalty wasn't so cruel and unusual after all. But to be fair, in a sweeping act of compassion and sympathy, the court did ban executing children and the intellectually disabled, so now we're super enlightened.
144 countries have abolished the death penalty in law or in practice. But 55 countries and territories still like it. The top 5 killers of their own citizens are China, Iran, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and the U.S. So I guess we're stuck with America being 5th, right behind some of the most cruel cultures on earth.
27 states use the death penalty, and most are in the South and Southwest, but some like California, Ohio, Oregon, and Pennsylvania have a moratorium. In total, there were 25 executions by states in 2024, and 3 were gas, but the rest were lethal injection, which has to be the most ridiculous way to execute someone painlessly since quartering, which, by the way, was tying each limb to a horse and then having them run away from the body in 4 different directions.
Since a moratorium on executions was lifted in 1977, there have been 1,613 executions, including 16 federal ones. 13 of those were carried out towards the end of Trump's first administration. In 2021, under Biden, Merrick Garland imposed a moratorium on federal executions, but to no one's surprise, Pam Bondi lifted the moratorium as soon as Trump was reelected.
And now there are only 5 countries in the developed world that still have the death penalty, but only 1 in the West. That's right. We don't just leave them all in the dust when it comes to death by gun. We're the best at death by government. America first.
So here are some of the most famous executions by method. Marie Antoinette was the last queen of France before the Revolution. She's probably best known by most Americans as the star of Sofia Coppola's great but not exactly historically accurate movie about her.
After they lopped off her head, her daughter became Queen of France until she had to flee to Australia to avoid her own execution. But the fun part is that she only ruled France for 30 minutes before she had to hit the road. And she was the one who was famous for saying, "Let them eat cake." But no, another made-up thing, just folklore.
So King Louis XVI also got the guillotine in 1793, which sounds like maybe 1793 wasn't a good year for French royalty. Then there's the hanging of Adolf Eichmann. He's best remembered as the architect of the Holocaust. It took till 17 years after World War II ended, but it was worth the wait to see him on the business end of a noose. He was hung in Israel, which would be great enough on its own, but it turns out Eichmann was actually Jewish.
And everybody remembers this one. In 2006, Saddam Hussein was convicted by the Iraqi High Tribunal for crimes against humanity. It only took 56 days from trial to gallows. The state-run media televised it.
Saddam is dressed in this raincoat, black suit, with his feet and hands tied, being taken to the gallows. He faced his final moments with some bravery, shouting, "God is great."
So there's too many great ones to mention them all, but here are a few good executions that were done in the electric chair. Ted Bundy was convicted for almost 30 murders, and those are just the ones we know about. We mentioned Old Sparky, and that's the one he got. It was a huge media event.
And if you don't remember Aileen Wuornos from the news, You probably remember her for the movie Monster, because Charlize Theron played her. Just think, if Warnos hadn't murdered 6 men, Charlize Theron would still be known as Academy Award nominee.
George Stinney, a 14-year-old black kid, was convicted of murdering 2 young white girls. His trial lasted only a few hours, and he was executed by the electric chair. He was so small, 5'1" and 95 pounds, that he had to sit on a book to fit in the chair. If you guessed it was a Bible, you'd be right. He was later proven innocent.
During the Civil War and the 2 World Wars, people got shot left and right, but there were 2 famous executions in the U.S. recently. This one's notable for all the attention it got. In 1977 in Utah, Gary Gilmore was the first person to be executed by firing squad after the death penalty was reinstated.
And what is it with Utah? In 2010, Ronnie Lee Gardner was shot by firing squad. It also made the front page because it was his choice.
Well, this one happened in South Carolina. A guy named Brad Sigmund chose the firing squad because he thought it would be less painful than all the suffering he'd heard about with lethal injection. I don't blame him. The surprise? It was in March of 2025, less than a year ago.
There are too many famous lethal injections to get into, and we will mention a few of them in our segment on botched executions later on. Because something like 30% of lethal injection executions involve some kind of gruesome fuck-up. But there was one where the guy didn't suffer nearly enough. In 2011 in Indiana, Timothy McVeigh was executed by lethal injection. If you don't remember him, the loved ones and families of the 168 people he murdered when he blew up a federal building in Oklahoma City do.
One of the benefits of me talking to you today is that you'll see that maybe not everything is true that you've heard about me.
It was at that point when I was fully intent in my life that I was going to live outside of the law. With Oklahoma City being a counterattack, I was only fighting by the rules of engagement that were introduced by the aggressor. Waco started this war. Hopefully Oklahoma would end it.
Well, am I pure evil? Am I the face of terror sitting here in front of you?
To this day, it's by far the deadliest and most horrific act of domestic terrorism in the country. Let's hope it stays that way forever.
So we looked at about 60 botched executions, and almost all of them were some kind of screw-up related to lethal injection that pretty much amounted to torture.
We don't have any idea why this is still the most used method, but apparently this stuff happens all the time.
Oklahoma's governor is demanding the review of the state's execution procedures after a botched execution last night.
Called botched execution of Joseph Wood once again has Arizona in the national headline.
In January, an Ohio inmate was also seen gasping for air during an execution. It took him 26 minutes to die.
Minutes after being declared unconscious, Lockett tried to lift his head, mumbled, and began squirming.
Why did it take so long for Joseph Wood to die? The execution lasted an hour and 58 minutes. Normally, it just takes about 10 minutes.
You'd think someone could figure out how to kill someone with an OD. I mean, more than 80,000 people managed to do it themselves in 2024, but these fuckwits couldn't.
And speaking of, you wouldn't believe how often they had to keep stabbing them when they couldn't find a vein because they were intravenous drug addicts, which they didn't know. Like, some of the methods were so awful they changed the laws.
Most of the more recent ones are in the U.S., but some other countries got on the list for really colorful screw-ups. In 1541, Margaret Pole, Countess of Salisbury, got her head chopped off. Maybe they wanted to save money or something, but for some reason, an inexperienced executioner hacked at her a total of 11 times before finally managing to cut her head off.
Apparently, she turned her head back and forth and told the executioner that if he wanted her head, he could try to take it. No one's sure if she actually did that, but we choose to believe.
Yes, we do. In 1650, in Oxford, England, they tried to hang Anne Green, but a day later, they found her alive in her coffin, and they let her go. This just didn't happen to her. In those days, people were sometimes pronounced dead and buried alive. So they started putting ropes in the coffins that were connected to a bell. That way, if somebody woke up, they could ring the bell and somebody would come dig them up. That's where the expression dead ringer came from. We didn't make that up, but someone else might have.
someone had passed America's atomic bomb secrets to Russia. The federal government had laid the crime at the doorstep of two native New Yorkers, Julius and Ethel Rosenberg. The two admitted Communist Party members knew that they faced possible death sentences in the event of their conviction. In April of 1951, the federal court of Judge Irving R. Kaufman found the pair guilty as charged and sentenced them to death in the electric chair to pay for their crime of treason.
Julius's execution went fine. Well, not for him. But Ethel had to be electrocuted 3 times. Then they took off the restraints and realized she was still alive, so they hit her twice more until her head started to smoke before she finally died.
So you might wonder how you can shoot someone with a machine gun and only attempt to kill them. And we sure did, but in Thailand it happened to a woman in 1979. Somehow, no one managed to know that she had a condition called situs inversus, which means that her organs were reversed, so the bullets didn't hit her heart.
And on top of that, they didn't figure out she wasn't dead until they got her to the morgue, so they took her out and shot her again.
Shit.
And in 1983 in Mississippi, Jimmy Lee Gray got the gas chamber, and a death penalty defense attorney said, and this is a quote, Jimmy Lee Gray died banging his head against a steel pole in the gas chamber. God. They found out later that the executioner was drunk. I mean, you just can't make this stuff up.
In 1990 in Florida, Jesse Joseph Tafiro was electrocuted. When they hit the power, a 6-inch flame shot out of the poor bastard's leg, and then it took 3 jolts to kill him. State officials helpfully said it was because of an inadvertent human error, as opposed to, well, we don't know what it's supposed to. Then in 1994 in Illinois, everyone's favorite serial killer and clown artist, John Wayne Gacy, was killed by lethal injection. After the execution began, the chemicals solidified and clogged the IV tube that was going into Gacy's arm. Anesthesiologists blamed the problem on the inexperience of prison officials who were doing the execution.
Yeah, no one said what an untrained jail cop was doing in an execution chamber with a needle and a bag of poison. But we learned that a lot of these lethal injections done by jailers were against capital punishment, but no one could have deserved it more than that prick.
In 1994 in North Carolina, David Scarborough Lawson was killed in the gas chamber. He was the first person executed in North Carolina after 1976. After they dropped the cyanide pellets into the sulfuric acid, the acid splashed onto his right leg. He strained at the strap so hard that it broke his leg, and he started screaming, "I am human," with mucus pouring out of his nose onto his blindfold.
And after his execution, they added splash guards.
It's like a fucking salad bar.
Yeah. They put these splash guards on the restraining chair to prevent it from happening again. How thoughtful. North Carolina only used the gas chamber one more time before they finally stopped using it. In 1997 in Florida, Pedro Medina was electrocuted. This is another one where flames a foot high shot out of a guy's head and filled up the death chamber with the stench of thick smoke that gagged the 24 witnesses. Then in Texas in 1998, a guy named Joseph Cannon got a lethal injection, and after he said his final words and they started, a vein in his arm collapsed. So when the needle popped out, he tried to help the idiots by telling them, and this is a quote, "It's come undone." Classy.
Yeah. In 1999 in Florida, Alan Lee Davis was electrocuted. When they hit the switch, blood poured out of his mouth onto his white shirt and oozed onto his chest to about the size of a dinner plate. It was the first execution in Florida's brand spanking new electric chair. Surprise, surprise.
A Florida state senator named Ginny Brown Waite, who was a witness, said she was shocked to see all that blood until she realized that it was forming the shape of a cross, which she interpreted as a message from God saying that he supported the execution.
Holy shit is right. The mess they made of the execution made Florida switch to lethal injection. But the electric chair is still a secondary method of execution wherever the death penalty is enforced. So executing people is pretty fucked up, but here's some historical, pretty fucked up ways to execute people. In ancient Greece, they locked victims inside a big brass bull and lit a fire underneath it. To make it more fun, at least from the outside, they put pipes in the bull's neck and head so it converted the screams into a sound like a bull bellowing.
In Southeast Asia, they actually train elephants to execute people by crushing. But it wasn't just a big animal smashing heads. To add a little drama, some elephants were trained to torture victims by breaking their bones slowly before they stomped them.
Poor elephant. He didn't want to do it. In ancient Rome, if you killed a parent or close relative, they sewed you into a leather sack with a rooster, a dog, a monkey, and a snake, which sounds like the beginning of a joke, but no, then they throw you in the water. They're using these poor animals to torture people.
Who thinks of this shit? How about rat torture? They put a bunch of hungry rats on a victim's bare stomach or chest, then heat the bucket from the outside to freak the rats out so they'd try to chew their way out. And unfortunately, the only way out was through the person's flesh and internal organs. And another one, molten silver. During the Mongol Empire, they didn't want to spill the blood of the noble, so instead they'd just pour molten silver down his throat.
And here are some modern methods of fucked up ways to kill people that are sanctioned by states in one country or another. Execution vans. What is an well, we're going to tell you what an execution van is. It's hard to believe this is still going on, but it is. China uses mobile execution units, which are vans equipped with lethal injection. We're not sure if anyone gets a trial first, but the idea is it's more efficient to do it near the scene of the crime or in the person's home.
In Somalia in 2009, a girl was stoned to death in front of 1,000 people in a stadium. Her crime? She reported that 3 men assaulted her. For that, she was charged with adultery and buried up to her neck screaming, "Don't kill me," and then 50 men threw heavy stones at her head.
After 10 minutes, they dug her up out of the hole, but she was still alive, so they buried her again and kept stoning her until she was dead. She was only 13 years old.
And then in Iran, they have a punishment called thrown from a tremendous height, which is, you probably can guess what that means. As recently as 2016, they used it to punish people for sodomy and homosexuality. ISIS also does it and puts them in their propaganda videos, but what doesn't ISIS do?
Yeah, and whose government is still using beheading as a form of execution? Saudi Arabia, of course, and recently too. In Uzbekistan, at least 2 people were boiled to death in 2002, but not before torturing them horribly first. Pretty self-explanatory, but we don't know if they threw them into the water that was already boiling or they just did it the frog way.
And why did they do this? Either because the victim believed in the wrong God or they believed in the right God incorrectly. And finally, you'd expect big things from Kim Jong-un in the execution department, and he doesn't disappoint. This is so great. Well, not for the guy. But he killed his defense minister for falling asleep, which by now no one would be surprised to hear.
But the way he did it was truly a chef's kiss. He put the guy in front of a big audience and shredded him with an anti-aircraft gun. We may not know how Little Rocket Man can top that, but we know he's working on it right now.
What would you have for your last meal?
Or what would your last words be? Please tell us at Taboo Treasures at evocreative.com or
find us on Instagram or TikTok. Now we're going to talk a little bit about killer groupies. Hybristophilia is a word we mentioned on another episode. Not that that's anything to brag about, but it's a lot more fun than it sounds. It's the word for whatever the hell the thing is that makes people fall in love with serial killers in prison.
Yeah, lots of incarcerated mischief makers have had groupies, but the most famous example is California's very own satanic rapist killer, Richard Ramirez, who was nicknamed the Night Stalker, not to be confused with the crappy 70s TV show of the same name. Not only did Ramirez get bags of mail and nude photos, chocolate, and lingerie from women who were obsessed with him, he actually married one of them, Doreen Loy, in a ceremony at San Quentin Prison.
They don't allow conjugal visits, but if Ramirez ever wore that lingerie, he probably didn't need one since he was also into sodomy. Although he was probably more into it the other way around, but we're just guessing.
One woman said she fell in love with Ramirez because he was good looking and she loved his big hands. You know, the hands that he used to beat and strangle 13 men women and children to death with.
Yeah, she said the danger of going up to a state penitentiary to see him was like a dream come true. And we think it's important to have a dream. She didn't want to be identified, though. You know, it's not like she's crazy.
And Scott Peterson was another killer who got a lot of love from the outside. Not only did women propose, some even deposited money in his bank account. Sometimes we make bad relationship decisions, but you can see the attraction because Peterson suffocated his pregnant wife and tied weights to her and then dumped her and her unborn child's body in the San Francisco Bay on Christmas Eve. Merry Christmas.
Well, we don't want to just make this sound like it's a thing for the ladies. It's not as common, but crazy boys will be crazy boys, and they make up about 20% of these totally romantic stories. Before someone's executed, they're asked if they have any last words, so here are a few examples of people with a real commitment to humor. Before a guy named Jimmy Glass got the electric chair for murder in 1987, he said, "I'd rather be fishing." On the other hand, if you've ever tried ice fishing, old Sparky might not look so bad.
While George Appel was getting strapped into the chair in 1928 for murdering a cop, he said, "Well, gentlemen, you're about to see a baked Appel." Way to go, George. The last word part, not the cop killing. Another one in the grand tradition of making a play on your name while you're waiting for someone to throw the switch. In 1966, Johnny French said, "How about this for a headline for tomorrow's paper? French fries."
You gotta love it. This guy named George Bernard Harris bought 3 machine guns and asked someone to hold them for him. And when the person refused to give him the guns, Harris shot him with a revolver. So that's too much irony for one paragraph, but it doesn't sound like he really needed the machine guns. Right before they filled him with the death juice for his lethal injection, he said, "Someone needs to kill my trial attorney."
So before you get your last words in, sometimes you get a last meal, right, Jeff? Yeah.
Yeah, man. Have you ever thought about what last meal you want?
Not really. Never been put in that position.
Well, let's come up with something and see if we can get sponsored, like a restaurant, and get some sponsorship.
In America, prisoners on death row get to choose a last meal a day or two before their executions, but there are some limitations. For example, most of the time you can't get alcohol or tobacco, so the irony lives on well after the person who's getting executed.
Also, you can't usually order up, the long, crazy list of stuff you hear about. For example, the last meal can't cost more than $40, and in Oklahoma, it's $15. To put that in perspective, depending on where you are, that's less than the cost of a Big Mac combo. To be fair, McDonald's fries are worth dying for.
That would be maybe on my last meal, McDonald's fries. Anyway, here are a few of the more notable requests. Victor Vergure was the last prisoner to be executed before the temporary federal moratorium. The only thing worse than his timing was his last meal, 1 olive. James Edward Smith asked for a piece of dirt, but it gets weirder. They refused and gave him yogurt instead. I think I'd rather have dirt. Aileen Warnos asked for a cup of coffee, and that didn't keep her up. And another hardcore coffee drinker, Veronique Franz, was a French serial killer who was executed in 1854. In a very convincing display of how French she was, right up until the end, she asked for a café au lait and a bread roll. There's a long-running debate about the cost of keeping a prisoner on death row versus someone who's doing life without parole.
It's hard to pin down exact figures because the costs vary a lot from state to state. For example, Massachusetts, California, and New York have the highest costs, with some estimates being as much as $100,000 to $120,000 per inmate per year.
On the other hand, states with the lowest costs like Mississippi and Arkansas spend around $23,000 to $30,000 per inmate per year. There's lots of reasons they vary so much. Some of the main ones are the quality of health care, size of staff, and facility maintenance.
One thing that is clear is that year on year, the average cost to keep someone on death row is about $60,000 to $70,000 more expensive than general population inmates. Because the average death row inmate spends 20 years there, which sounds crazy, but it's true, the total cost over a lifetime is also higher. Some studies show that over that many years, a death penalty inmate can cost as much as $1 million more than someone doing life without parole.
Yeah, the reasons range from things like higher costs for investigations and trials to the appeals process, which can drag on for years. In the end, by far the majority of studies show that the annual cost of keeping an inmate on death row is much higher than in general population.
There are collectibles related to the most famous or notorious executions, but most of them have been lost to history. For example, Mata Hari, the famous Dutch exotic dancer who became a spy, was executed by a French firing squad in 1917. Is one of those rifles still out there somewhere?
Anne Boleyn had her head chopped off by a sword. Is that sword out there somewhere? There are a lot of people named John Brown, but have you ever heard of the one who was executed for the crime of wanting to end slavery? That's a little simplistic, but he really was a committed abolitionist, and inciting a slave rebellion didn't make him a lot of friends in Virginia in 1859. Whatever happened to the gallows they used to hang him? There are hundreds of these, but we just got a few examples of the things used in executions that we do know still exist.
One of them is Saddam Hussein's noose, and some say that a former Iraqi national, the security advisor who was at his execution, has the noose that was used to hang him. There were photos at his home in Baghdad of a bronze bust of Hussein with the rope draped around it. Since 2015, there have been rumors that he put the rope up for auction and got bids as high as $7 million, supposedly from buyers in Iran, Israel, and Kuwait, but nothing's been substantiated.
No one's positive about where the specific guillotine used to behead Marie Antoinette in 1793 is, but there are artifacts linked to her execution in museums. One of them is the guillotine blade that some experts believe is the one, but again, there's not enough concrete evidence to be sure.
There's one we do know about, though. In New York in August of 1890, William Kemmler was the first person executed by electric chair.
So this is not a blade or a rope or a chair that's related to any execution, but in 1968, Andy Warhol did a series of 300 canvas prints called The Electric Chair. It was inspired by Kemmler's execution. He signed 250 prints and 50 artist proofs, and one of them sold at Christie's auction for $25 million. That's a steep price for a part of American history, but the actual chair isn't for sale because it's at the New York State Museum in Albany.
But if a collector could get their hands on it, what would it be worth to them, and what kind of person would want it in their collection?
So that does it for today's episode. We really hope you liked it. If you want, you can reach out to us at Taboo Treasures at evocreative.com, or where else, Jeff?
Taboo Treasures on Instagram and TikTok.
Goodbye. From EVO, Taboo Treasures is produced by Bruce Whitkin and Jeff Levine. Executive producer Brandon Morgan. Music by the Lonely Bulls.